Okay, folks. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to my cupboard of an office. This afternoon, firstly, just to introduce myself for those of you that haven't met me or come across me in the past, my name is Paul Allcock, and I'm the Government Liaison Officer for SAIF. Essentially, I cover all aspects and relationships that we have with government, representing you and the association as a whole, to the best of my capabilities, essentially, calling on my historical experience and knowledge that I've gained, and also calling on members such as each of you for advice and guidance as well, and to hopefully be able to offer some in return. From a personal perspective, it's very rewarding, but also quite challenging. And obviously today, hopefully, I'm going to touch on the main elements that are affecting funeral service today, of which there are a number. Although with Brexit, or the lack of Brexit that it's been, there have been delays in a number of elements, and a number of actions that the government may well have carried forward. However, there are a number that are obviously still carrying on as we speak at the moment. So I'm going to touch on those that really are the most current, shall we say. And while I'm doing so, if anyone does have any questions, firstly, I better just make sure. I know that John and Sandra noted that they could hear me earlier on. If folk can just quickly put a note just to say that I am being heard clearly by everybody, or if I need to turn my speaker up if it's a little bit quiet. So good. So it looks promising. Excellent. Okay. So the first one, which is probably the most relevant currently, is the CMA, the Competition and Markets Authority investigation or inquiry into funeral services. I hope you're all aware that this is going on. If you're not, I'm not sure which cupboard you've been sat in until this point. Essentially, it's an investigation looking into the practices. It came about as a result, essentially, of stories. I mean, we've all been dealing over the last few years with the stories of funeral poverty, and seen stories in the press regarding extremely high prices for funerals. I've sat and read some of the reports and wondered where on earth they get the figures from. I have to be honest, but it's been evident that some of them have been factual, and we're aware that the co-op and dignities of this world have been having to act quite strictly and bring their costs into line, or at least hopefully bringing them down a little bit to be fairer and in line with general competition. Currently, as things stand, the CMA is having, as I say, the current market investigation. It's into funeral services and crematoria, so it's not just purely funeral services. And they're touching on essentially elements such as standards and quality, fair pricing, and transparency are probably the three main elements that they're looking at the moment. Essentially, there is going to be very shortly an approach to a number of our members from the CMA, with a questionnaire and possibly even site visits from the CMA. What I would say, please, to everybody out there, is to not be afraid of it. I've been approached to have a look at the questionnaire that they're putting out, although I can't comment specifically on it. I have made my views known to the CMA, and they are reviewing some of the documents that they're putting forward as we speak. But over the next couple of months, through the SAIF office, they're going to be approaching SAIF first they are going to be coming forward with some proposals and information that they want from the membership. Now, if you are of a business which you can hold your hand up and say quite comfortably that you are proud of the standards that you set, you are comfortable with the quality of your premises and staff, and they're up to date with training, and the business is run fairly, then there's no doubt at all you have absolutely nothing to worry about. In fact, personally, I actively encourage the inquiry that's going on currently. They're, as I say, looking not just at price, but also at the care of the deceased and the support of the families that they receive at this time. And so their discussions with members, and it is an open forum essentially for all of you, even if you're not approached, to actually make contact with the CMA with your views and opinions. All the documents are online. I'll show you the link is actually at the bottom of the screen here, www.gov.uk CMA cases funeral market study. If you go on that link, you will actually find all the documents from the inquiry over the last 18 months and the proposed time frames and so on for the coming months ahead. So I'll just actually touch on their time frames and what they're going to be looking at. So the reference was made by the CMA in March. They published an issue statement, which again is available online. SAIF, myself, along with other representatives, will be meeting with the CMA next month, or possibly even the beginning of July. I'm not sure, can't remember the exact date. And we will be put a presentation to them and listening to their views and points and what they've discovered so far. But throughout this period, they're happy to receive any documents or information that anybody is prepared to actually pass on to them. So please don't hold back. I know a number of members already have done so in response to their initial documentation and questions. But please, do be prepared to get involved, because otherwise, if things happen that you're not comfortable with and you haven't actually had an input or a say in what's going on, then you can only blame yourselves for not being directly involved. So essentially the publications are going to be happening over the coming year. Their findings will be published, and as you can see, the January 2020 is the deadline for all party responses, and submissions are required before a final decision and report is made. And then in February and March next year, there will be the decisions and responses to the hearings, of which SAIF are one, and then the final deadline for all responses before their final report, and the statutory deadline in September next year. So it's essentially an 18-month inquiry from March this year, and the one thing I would very much say is that, if I just touch on one or two of the elements, the examples of the actual issues that are being considered, there's what customers consider to be the essential components of a funeral and what they understand to be a good quality funeral or crematorium, and how they assess quality when dealing with funeral directors and crematoria. Well, the crematoria obviously is a slightly separate element to what our direct interest is, but they are going to be looking at how we actually liaise and what components there are to a funeral, and that's a challenge to us, actually breaking it down into different elements. The extent to which the vulnerability of customers at the point of need impedes their ability to engage with the process and make informed choices at all stages in the funeral arrangement process. Well, in my experience, the vast majority of people will come in not on their own, but with others around them and supporting them. So, there may be occasions where people are vulnerable, and we have to be aware of that and make sure that, in those situations, people are treated appropriately and made sure that that they are given informed choices and are given the time and the opportunity to make changes if required. So that's one area that the CMA are very, very particular on. Aspects relating to the actual, what they class as the funeral sales process, such as how and when prices are given, that may affect customers' ability to make the best choices. Now, I know historically many funeral directors leave actually the pricing of a funeral until they've arranged it. And I know that we within SAIF have obviously encouraged people, our members, to have all their prices online on their websites, and that's another area that they're going to be looking at. So I think it's really important that you actually take the time to be totally transparent when it comes to pricing, because that is certainly something that they're going to be touching on. Then the finances, they're actually looking directly into the profitability of large and small funeral directors and the extent to which cost increases and or investments in quality improvements explain the increases in funeral prices that have been reported. Well, I think that's a very debatable point for many, as far as those of us who treat our businesses exactly as that, as a business and not an exploitation of our clients, again would have nothing to fear, but they are going to be looking very closely at the actual profit margins of funeral services, and how those margins are come to, and comparing like for like as best they can. So it'd be interesting to actually see, the outcomes from that. And then the nature and extent of competition between both private and local authority crematoria. That's a crematoria issue, so I don't think we need to touch on that particularly. So they're looking subsequently then, probably the likely outcomes that they're looking to actually deal with are creating measures to improve transparency, pricing and charging remedies. Exactly what that will look like, none of us have any idea at this stage, but it's something that obviously we will be wanting to have an input on, and measures to regulate the levels of service quality provided by funeral directors and crematoria. So again, those levels and standards that SAIF have been upholding for many years now. It's really important that that we are very strict with ourselves as businesses, but also within SAIF, to make sure that the standards are of the very highest quality. And also new businesses. One of the areas they're looking at is measures such as lowering barriers for new businesses, and looking at different elements to a business. And we've had that recently with companies just opening as and offering direct cremations, perhaps without having a premises and so on. So there are some question marks over that really need to be highlighted, as to what's classed as appropriate and what actually consists of a funeral service offering, or if you're breaking it down and you can just have one part of a funeral service. For many years, for example, we've had carriage masters who will just be the carriage masters, so they'll provide the vehicles for the funeral, but they won't necessarily provide any of the other elements of the funeral. So it's areas like that which aren't necessarily going to be controlled at the moment within funeral arranging and organising, because they're from a third party, but it's one of the areas that they're going to be looking at and bringing those into the whole equation. So in a nutshell, I think the important thing for all of us is to be open, be transparent as much as possible, uphold the highest standards, make sure that your staff are up to date with all training elements, and are as knowledgeable as they can be, and obviously the support and of our clients through some of the other elements that I'll touch on in a few minutes anyway, I think are really important. So essentially, unless anybody has any desperate questions they want to ask on that, I think Andrea's just put, I was informed only yesterday that tributes charge funeral directors more than any other customers because we're an expensive business. My reply, yes, because of attitudes like this. Interesting. Yeah. So I mean, hopefully, you know, the whole element of the inquiry. I mean, already in Scotland we have an inspector of funerals who's been allocated, but a lot of that element has been put on hold while this inquiry is going on. It's feasible that that may be one of the propositions ultimately that comes out of this. Again, we don't know. There's been no specific discussion on that element, and so everything that is talked about is almost guesswork at the moment. I think it's going to be a very thorough inquiry, and there is little doubt that the experience I've had with the members of the CMA so far, I have to say, has been positive as far as what they're looking at. But we do have to be very careful that we show both SAIF but our individual businesses in the very best light possible. And I think anybody who receives contact from them, please do take the time to interact and be involved in this whole process, because it is so important that we get it right and we come out with the right result at the end of the day, because it could very easily turn against us and become an element where we are very much dictated to in many elements of what we do. And I think it's really important that we actually stand up for the good service and qualities that we provide at the moment, and stand up for all the wonderful elements that independent funeral directors are able to offer. So please do, if you are approached, all I can say is do interact and take the time and trouble to, you know, even if you're not contacted, get in touch with them, tell them your thoughts, read the documents. It's that important to your business and to each of us as individuals to make sure that this is right, and for the public's sake at the end of the day, which is who they're concerned about. They're not particularly worried about funeral directors per se. It's what the service that the public receive being appropriate and right, and that's the CMA's viewpoint, is that that's what they're aiming for, and it's up to us to be able to provide the best possible outcome for that purpose. Okay. I'm just going to move on now to the introduction of medical examiners. If I can touch on most of the elements, and then perhaps we just have a general question and answer session at the end, that would be really helpful. So medical examiners, April this year, have been rolled out, not across the whole country as yet, on a non-statutory basis. Now, basically, that means that regions and areas don't have to be introducing a medical examiner at this stage. Now, there were two pilot areas in Sheffield and the Gloucester area, which have been quite successful and have continued to do with the rollout, and they're actually going to be moving it out into the community rather than just within the NHS trusts. In England, it's going to be within NHS trusts. It's going to be managed in Wales by local health boards. Now, initially, the medical examiner is simply going to be replacing the doctor that currently completes Form 5, the second doctor, and is going to be paid the same fee while it's still in a non-statutory basis. And that fee would be payable to the relevant trust or board, not to the doctor concerned. But as it's not statutory at the moment, as I stated, some trusts may decide not to actually implement an ME at all until they're dictated to by government to do so. Now, the medical examiner is essentially going to be there's one national lead medical examiner, and then there are going to be 7 regions it's going to be split into, and plus 1 in Wales. But there are going to be 3 three medical officers and a medical examiner proposed per 3,000 deaths, which is per year, which is obviously going to be quite a workload for them, to say the least. The other thing they can take on board, because ultimately the proposal is that the medical examiner will be dealing with all deaths, so burials as well. They can get involved with burials if they are brought into the process at this stage. However, there's no fee for that if they do take on a burial instead of a cremation. Also, if a family don't want a medical examiner to be involved in the documentation at all, they have the right to refuse it, because again, it's non-statutory. It may be that they act as the second doctor anyway. It really won't make any difference to what we're experiencing. Now, I don't know whether some of you are in areas where medical examiners are already in process. I don't know if anyone can just comment, perhaps if you are experiencing dealing with medical examiners. So there are a couple of you there anyway, at least. So you'll already be experiencing, and please just note on there if you've had any difficulties, because it's really helpful to me to feed back if there are any issues and elements. There are things that we can still feed back into the system at this stage of any difficulties or any problems that anybody is having. My understanding is that that there haven't been any. I've certainly not had any issues highlighted to me as yet, because it is still a very simple process. But yeah, it's working well. So that's great that there are some areas where it started. Hopefully it will increase the speed of the whole process. And I think at the moment it really is very little difference that it's going to make. It's when they start coming out into the community, which is going to be a staged process. That in some areas, as I said, certainly the two original pilot areas I know are planning to roll out into the communities at a very early stage. In the other areas, they're just going to simply establish, first of all, in the NHS trusts before then moving out into the community. So it'll be interesting to see how that progresses, and when burials become involved, and the liaison between a medical examiner ultimately and the coroner's office, because they are going to be scrutinising all deaths essentially in due course. And the proposal is that all deaths in England and Wales, the government would like to see being scrutinised by the medical examiner by early 2021. So we've still got a bit of time ahead of us, but until we reach the point where it actually becomes statutory, then it's going to be a little bit open-ended from that perspective. But it is important, because you may get queries from families, because the one thing the medical examiner is going to be doing is interacting more with families. I know very often the second doctor will speak to families on occasions. It's more likely that they'll be speaking to them on almost every occasion. So I think one thing from a funeral director's perspective is just to advise families that they are very likely, if you're in an area where a medical examiner procedure is in place, that they are very likely to get contact from the medical examiner. In fact, almost certain. And just to warn them of that at the time of arrangements, if they haven't already had contact with them, would be sensible, just so they're aware and aren't shocked as to who this is phoning them. As I said, many second doctors do it at the moment anyway. But of course, to have the family aware of the scenario is just a sensible, logical option to take. So the actual process, let's say, the fee will be going directly to the NHS trust. In the case of burials, there'll continue to be no charge to the family at all anyway. Again, there's a link there to the BMA, which gives a degree of information. If anyone is interested as well, I have the Royal College of Pathologists have information days that you can apply to attend, which are very interesting. I attended one a few months ago, which gave updates on the current position, and you can access reports on those at the Royal College of Pathologists website, which is it's not actually printed on the sheet there, but if anyone's interested, I'm not sure. I think I can type it in here, so I'll just type that in for you. It's rcpath.org. I should have put this on my presentation, so I apologise for this, but I'll note it on here, and hopefully this will come up in front of you in a moment when I've eventually written it. Medical. The other thing you can do through this particular website, the pathologist website, is they have online courses that someone training to be a medical examiner, HTML, someone training to be a medical examiner. I'll just put, I entered that. I don't know if it's come up. Can anyone just say whether that's come up on your screens from myself? Or, yeah, okay, good. The other thing you can gain by accessing there, they have the training program, the online training program, which anybody can register for, and you don't have to pay for the basic details, but it's quite interesting to actually go in and have a look at what the training consists of, and you can see what the medical examiners are actually being told and asked to do through that program. So through the pathologist website, it's quite an interesting place to actually have a read through there. So that information is out there in the public domain. It's just helpful for you to have a look at it now and then. Okay, moving on to DWP and the benefits. Not many changes, to be honest, in recent times. Again, there's a new lead. Those of you that came to the AGM will have seen a presentation by the new lead, Angela Kidd, within the DWP on funeral benefits. Now, she was very new, bless her, to her position, and was thrown into the lion's den a little bit by speaking at the AGM. But it was nice that she was at least prepared to come along and to present to us, and has actually been quite open with wanting to talk to us and have open dialogue with us on a number of elements. So, which, to be honest, is very refreshing. It's not something we've always had, so it's nice to have that dialogue with someone new. I had quite a good relationship with the last lead, but again, being able to speak to somebody directly and sit down whenever we want to, which is the proposal that she's given, is really useful. The funeral payment, essentially we're still with the £700, which you'll all be aware of. They are trying to speed up the process of application, and online and telephone applications are encouraged. All of those are accessible through the website that I've noted on there. It's very worth you and encouraging your staff to go on that particular site just to familiarise yourselves with what is available, who is eligible to claim any benefits, and what additional benefits are available. So not just from the funeral payment, but there's a new funeral expenses bereavement support payment, sorry, which essentially replaced the widow's benefit last year, and so it's worth having a look at that, because previously we used to get a £2,000 lump sum if your partner wasn't, or you weren't at pension age. Now they've changed that, and the first payment, depending on whether you're actually on benefits anyway or not, but the minimum you would get would be £2,500 as an initial payment, and then you would get 18 months payments of £100 following that, and the higher rate is £3,500 and £350 a month. Well, a lot of people aren't even aware that that's available to them, and it's one that people don't claim necessarily. But if they're on the higher rate and they get the first payment of £3,500, in an awful large number of cases, they'll have paid for their funeral just with that first payment. So, on top of the claim for a funeral payment benefit, that's well worth you making sure that your staff are aware of advising and guiding people towards those additional benefits that are available to them. Going back to the £700 argument that we've had for years, I think the 700 cap was first put in about 2003, and I stand to be corrected on that. I know it wasn't much less than that prior to that anyway, and it certainly hasn't increased since. We are constantly banging on the door and arguing the logic behind that cap. I've personally spoken to them. The thing that gets me a little bit is that they pay the essential elements of the funeral, and funeral directors aren't classed as being an essential element of a funeral, would you believe? The crematoria or cemetery, and cemetery tends to be based on the lowest price in a particular area, and that's down to their discretion to put the amount that they feel is relevant. In some areas it can be quite a lot of money, because if there are limited options available and they're all quite expensive, then that won't make any difference. They'll still pay that amount. In other perhaps rural areas, the local options might only be a few £100s rather than many thousands, which we can in some of the larger local authority areas. So those figures that they pay out vary hugely. But we still, effectively, the funeral director's element has actually gone down in value, because although it was £700, that includes the clergy fees and other additional expenses. Well, we all know that the ministers from back in the early 2000s, when I think it was probably about £25, £30, something like that, we're now talking £200 or thereabouts. So you can take that down, takes our figure effectively down to £500 from what would have been, say, £670. So the goalposts really do appear to be unfair. We do keep arguing on that front, but as I say, they still don't seem to see that their argument is that anybody can organise a funeral and do a DIY funeral, for example, without the use of a funeral director. The fact that 99.9% of people will enlist a funeral director isn't seem to be relevant. So, my argument is that funeral directors are an essential element and subsequently should be paid fairly and rightly. There's also the point, of course, that back in the day, most of the crematoria and cemeteries that they would be paying the fees to would have been run by the local authorities anyway. So essentially the funds were going back into local government, whereas now there are many private cemeteries and crematoria who aren't penalised in any way as funeral directors are. So again, it's quite concerning that we're not seen in an appropriate manner as being professional and relevant. So from that point of view, we will keep working on it and keep coming up with hopefully eventually we'll get some response. Okay. I'm not going to touch much on this, the investigation into prepaid funeral plans. This has been running alongside the CMA investigation. I haven't been so involved with this because the likes of Golden Charter and SAIF Charter and all the other prepaid plan companies this is more relevant to them really. The CMA, actually, just going back to that, are including as part of their inquiry the prepaid element at the time of need and how fitting that is and how that's managed, and how funeral directors take on allocations or not, and subsequently, the public's experience of the time of need and looking back then at the element of how it was originally sold and the appropriacy of that through the whole process. But the Treasury are looking into this obviously in much greater detail, although there seems to have been a much slower process with that than the CMA. That's one that does seem to be taking its time to actually come up with any real responses or elements. But they're looking at such as, which authority should actually be managing funeral plans. Should it be the Funeral Planning Authority, which oversees the planning companies in the main at the moment, those that are registered anyway, or should they come under the Financial Conduct Authority? And that goes back to the first element there that just mentioned, that the question, is it a financial product or is it a paid funeral service, and subsequently what bracket should that come into? So as I say, I'm not going to touch too much on that because I haven't been personally directly involved with that, so I don't want to comment too much on something that I haven't been directly involved with. The same goes for Scotland, actually. I know it said on the newsletter that was sent out to everybody that I'd be talking about the changes in Scotland. And for any folk on here from Scotland, I apologise, but I'm not going to touch on that too much because our friends in Scotland have been dealing with that more than I. I am aware, if you bear with me 1 second, that there are slight differences in just going back to the funeral payment scheme. The one thing that has happened in Scotland is that they have actually the £700 element, they have actually made that index linked, so it will increase in time. It's still £700 at the moment, so they haven't changed it currently, but they have index linked it, I understand, so that in due course, as time goes on, at least that 700 should increase, even though that the amount is so ridiculous compared to current costs. They're also looking at increasing the speed of the turnaround of those plans and so on. And obviously they already have the SAIF, the inspector, in Natalie McHale in Scotland. I've met with her on a couple of occasions, and to be fair, she is very fair to funeral directors, and her outlook and her views of the profession, I've been very impressed with when I have met with her. And I think she actually is a really positive thing. And actually, I know in Scottish Parliament and so on up there, she's been batting on behalf of funeral directors against some of the elements from government up there. So it's really interesting that someone who's been put in a position actually sees the values that we as funeral directors are able to offer, and is then putting the benefits forward and looking at making things right for the public in that vein. So let's come on to questions. I hope I haven't bored you all too much. I could literally go on all afternoon talking about the in-depth elements, but that's why I've put the links on there to the websites, because I think it's really important that actually you take the time to read through those pages and just make yourselves familiar with all the elements that are there. So if anybody has any questions, please do fire away. I'm very happy to answer any questions that anybody has. I'm aware that people that sometimes dip in and out of these webinars, so if anyone's been out and come back in and perhaps missed one of the elements, then please ask away. Can I just ask as well if you're able to click on any of the pages at all, or to go back to, or do you only see what I click on my page? Because I'm not sure, I did this once before, but somebody else was managing it. So if someone could just tell me whether you can click on those, that would be helpful. Okay. Right. What's going on? Yeah, just going back, I noticed, sorry, I haven't picked up on all the questions that have been asked already. Yeah, the children's funeral fund. I will touch on that. This was raised very much. Carolyn Harris, who lost her own child, put to government that children's funerals should be free. Theresa May announced last year that that would be the case. There was a question, nothing had happened at all until earlier this year when she was asked again in question time about what was happening with the Children's Fund. And to be honest, my understanding is at this stage that nothing has happened. If you speak to local authorities, and it is only for local authorities that this is relevant, it's been published in the press that the children's funerals are going to be free regardless. Funeral directors make their own decision over whether they charge or not for funerals. I know many of us don't, but we might have different stages as to what we charge and how we charge for different people. We have no legislation governing us as to what we should or shouldn't do. So as funeral directors, you have entire choice. It's purely the local authority element, so the cemetery or crematoria, that they're saying should be free. And there has been no advice or guidance given to local authorities or crematoria at this stage at all. So it's very much up in the air. And the last meeting I was at when this was discussed, the folk around the table, the civil servants, weren't even aware that the question was being asked in Parliament the day before, and essentially said we would just keep you informed. We have no updates at this stage at all. So things are being said in Parliament which aren't actually necessarily happening. So let me just try and find my questions up here. Right. It's all the children's fund. Can you get the children's fund? Yeah. Does that? Can you get the children's? Yeah. I'm just trying to access your questions. I do apologise. I'm having my own issues here. Here we go. All right. Okay, they can't click on the pages. Okay. Yeah, as far as Golden Charter are concerned, as far as I'm aware, there may be elements of them. It's not my area of expertise, so I don't want to say one way or the other on that. But my understanding is that it's voluntary with the funeral planning authority, and at the moment they're not governed by the Financial Services Act. That's my understanding, but I'm not an expert in that area, I have to say. The Children's Fund, yeah, the term, we are talking 0 to 18 years, under 18, which, I know many firms have looked at children's funerals, and they would perhaps class them up to 12 or even 16, but the proposal in government is indeed that it's under 18. But as I say, there's nothing happening at the moment. The Prime Minister's last statement said it would be introduced by the summer, but I'm certainly not aware of any proposals being made or any information going to local authorities at this stage. But obviously, as soon as we hear through the SAIF offices, we will make sure that the members are made aware of that. I'm just trying to get to the bottom of the page again. Able to let us have the website, as I can't go back. Yeah, I'll flip back through. I'll go back to the start of the pages so that you can hopefully see the various websites. There's the Competition and Markets Authority website there with the page. Sorry, I apologise if you weren't able to flip. I assumed you'd be able to touch on on the screen and see each individual page, but that's fine. I'll leave that one there for a few moments, and then I'll go to the others with websites on. Okay. Any other questions particularly? I see Andrea's writing at the moment, so I'll just wait for her comments. Okay. Hopefully you've all got that one. I'll go back again if it's felt necessary. There's the timetable here for the CMA's timetable, but as I say, what I would mention again, I can't reiterate enough the importance of actually interacting with them and making sure that's that you're very open to contact. Councils conducting funerals as well as owning crimes and burial grounds. Yeah, I can't comment on where they stand, but it is certainly a question which has been raised. They are aware of the scenario. So often interesting in some of these meetings just how little they are aware of, and that's where it's really important that they are happy to interact with the likes of us to be able to give them the relevant factors and points. Now, we're all aware that councils conducting funerals, and be they contracted out or in-house or whatever, are there are areas where this has been happening, and it is a concern. Likewise, through hospices and the like, there are various elements, even coroners' contracts, all these areas are going to be looked into, I believe, with regards to appropriate practice, both from the local authorities' perspective, from NHS contracts, any involvement with a funeral director that is there for the public domain essentially is going to be explored to see what's appropriate, and hopefully eradicate any inappropriate practice that may be going on at the moment. The BMA website I listed on earlier, I assume you can at least access back on the page that where I typed in the page for the Royal College of Pathology, so that should be there. So I'm very happy to answer any concerns that you may have, because it's easy for me to assume that you all know, and I don't want to be telling people how to suck eggs or anything, but unless I see areas that are concerning you or areas of interest, then it's difficult for me to elaborate on one particular area too much. Okay, Martha's typing. So yeah, there's the benefits website there as well, and that literally takes you to all the benefits available for bereavement benefits that are available for folk at the time of death. So that's really really important that you make sure that all your staff are aware of that. Yeah, I agree, Ashley, entirely. I mean, there've been so many issues surrounding doctors obviously not going out at night and out of hours, and subsequently families contacting on-call out of hours services who aren't aware of the circumstances surrounding a death, and then subsequently the coroner and the police becoming involved, which is very traumatic and distressing for the family, to say the least. This is certainly an area which I've tried to make folk aware of, just as an element without the government's involvement. I think one thing we can do is actually contact local surgeries and make them aware of of the situation and how their actions are affecting our clients and subsequently their patients. And perhaps if it is at least an expected death, for them to advise families that they don't need to necessarily call the out of hours service, but that they can authorize us to collect, and then the doctor see the body at the funeral premises the following day. That is something that doctors are allowed to do, and it's certainly something that I feel would be a sensible option to put to doctors. So it's a question of making sure people are informed and are aware, leading up to a death which is at least expected, because there's nothing worse than having the ambulance come, or whoever it may be, and then the police turn up on your doorstep. It's very sad, but there we are. New system with police not attending. Bear with me, I'm just trying to access the questions again. Will the CMA take into consideration of quality of premises and service in respect to pricing compared to those who don't? Online or just front office, therefore the public aware of this when pricing. Yeah, I think that's I mean, my argument is absolutely that transparency needs to be throughout, and quality is all important, and ensuring that families are able, to make an appropriate judgment. That's essentially what they're looking at, being able to make an appropriate judgment of what is good quality and good fair service, good service standards, and fair pricing. Their difficulty is actually comparing like for like, and I think it's easy to look wonderful online, but then to not have the best facilities at your premises. And I think it's an area which is going to be difficult to police in any circumstances, but it is something that they certainly need to be aware of, and how that transparency works. But it has absolutely got to be in all things. Police do not attend in this area, and doctors are having problems contacting the coroners. Interesting. Okay. Well, if it's out of hours, then I think my understanding is that if the doctor or anybody isn't prepared to issue certificate, then the police in most areas are the representatives of the coroner out of hours, but not in all areas. So that's something that would have to be taken up directly with the local coroner's office, I'm guessing. It's interesting to hear that, though. So that's interesting feedback, and I shall certainly make a note to that effect. I'll do that now. Thank you. Okay. The Scottish inspector was thinking of a star rating like restaurants, which would take into consideration perhaps. Yeah, I mean, this is something which we actually have discussed at SAIF Executive, and I know Terry Tennans, our chief executive officer, is quite keen. I don't necessarily feel that's a bad idea. It's a question of who actually creates that star rating. At the moment, it would have to be through SAIF, through ourselves, to achieve that. It's up for discussion, certainly, as to how we achieve that. In Scotland, if it's a government-led thing, then they would obviously set the benchmarks. If it's still within, any inspections are coming under SAIF or an EFD's auspice, then it would be something that we would have to think about and decide in-house. Excuse me. Yeah, TripAdvisor. I mean, that's my only concern. I know there are a number of review websites now, and the price comparison sites are another area that are being explored. All elements that are relating to appropriacy and families being able to access directly. I mean, I know certainly not all, in fact, probably the majority of funeral directors aren't necessarily attached to a one or another comparison website, and subsequently you're still likely to only be comparing one or two options. And reviews, as we all know, they can be abused. So I think that's a questionable alternative, the TripAdvisor scenario. People can put reviews on through Google at the moment anyway, and some funeral directors have their own reviews on site. That's fine. I think that's a personal choice, but I think it's more the star rating issue. Yeah, this is absolutely, you're right, Marsha. It's something we have discussed, and it is possible that that's something that may well come to fruition at some point. We're just not there at this stage. So at the moment, SAIF and NAFD essentially are the standards of quality. Although I have to say that I think that there are some areas where we haven't been strict enough necessarily in some areas of inspection, and I'm sure NAFD are the same. And in fact, even in, not being critical of NAFD, but they took out the simple funeral from their code of practice a few years ago, and it's a question of where those decisions are coming from, and ensuring that the appropriate standards and levels are still in place. I've just lost the last questions again. Bear with me. All right. Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure you're right, Andrew. I think, to be honest, the vast majority of funeral directors, certainly in my case, you rely on word of mouth and recommendation from people who have experienced good service and good quality, and that's certainly the element which we need to be most reliable on, and it's certainly the most reliable source of standards, and someone who's already experienced that scenario. And obviously funeral directors for hundreds of years now have been carrying on business in that light. So it's, yeah, there is only so much that you can explore. And Chris, I'm very concerned the star system based upon premises. Yeah, high resource cost does not equal high service and appropriate. Yeah, and this is, these are all elements where it does become difficult, and it's not a level playing field necessarily. So it is something that has been discussed, and it is on the table, but we shall see. If it's not the right thing, then it won't happen. But it may be dictated to us. We may not have a choice, and it may be, as someone alluded to earlier, that Natalie McHale perhaps had mentioned it, that it may be something that's going to be coming anyway. But providing that, the challenge always is getting a true reflection of any business as far as standards and quality are concerned, and that's the real difficulty. Something else was writing there. My message bar keeps taking me back to the top all the time, and I have to get back down to the bottom, so do bear with me. We're logged on today, and it was a completely new program to the one I'd done the trial on last week, so I do apologise for taking your time and getting back to answer some of these. Okay, the star system. Yeah, I mean, any comments like that, I'm very happy to take away. And oh, thank you, Sandra. You're very kind. I'm very happy to take away with me and put to all parties that are going to be involved in any of these decisions. That's what I'm here for. I'm not only going with my own ideas and my own thoughts and my own experiences, as I said earlier. I'm trying to take with me what's relevant to the membership and the comments that each of you make as well. But you do, as I've said from the outset, you have the opportunity, certainly where the CMA is concerned, to interact with them directly, and I would encourage you to do so. Um, so, okay. It was interesting. We've obviously got a slight divide on opinion on some things there, but that's fine. There's nothing wrong with agreeing to disagree sometimes, but it usually ends up that we come up with an appropriate criteria and an option to move forward. No problem. My pleasure, Andrew. I think we're just coming up to our time anyway. Yeah, and there has to be minimum standards. But as has been mentioned already, it's difficult to see from that how people are treated directly. It's a very personal experience. Some people won't be too worried about the premises if they get looked after and well treated. And I know in Norfolk, where I'm from, there are a number of rural areas where funeral directors, their premises are perhaps limited, and providing they're clean and carry out the purpose, the actual service that the local people are getting is still very good and very appropriate for them. And I think it's very difficult to, not everybody's gonna have the capability to have the best facilities and the best the families actually know. Good. Okay. No, you're absolutely right there. We need to stick together, but we also need to make our voices heard. And I think that's sometimes the challenge. I have to say, many funeral directors, bless them, in my experience, have been quite passive historically, and I think it's really important that we do make our voices heard and make sure that people are aware of the difficulties that we encounter, but also shout from the rooftops the standards and the quality that so many of us are providing. And I take my hat off to all of you out there that are doing right by your clients. Okay, good. I'm glad that you all found that useful. Anyway, what I would say, if anybody wants to send me any questions in due course, if there's anything that I haven't touched on or anything that you perhaps want to contact me directly, you're very welcome to do so. I have a SAIF email now, which is simply paul@saif.org.uk. So you're very welcome to contact me directly there. I'll just put that on here for anybody that wishes to get in touch directly with me, or you're welcome. The girls in the office have my contact details anyway. So please feel free with any concerns or any queries that's government related. Please do let me know, because I only see my part of the world and what I hear at the exec offices and from regional meetings. But it's really important that you're able to make your voices heard, and you do have that opportunity at the moment. So please do so. Okay.